In the last video, we explored how this cognitive function appears in the conscious mind through the hero, parent, child, and inferior functions. But the story doesn't end there. The same cognitive function also exists in the shadow. It doesn't become a different function. It simply becomes less conscious, less trusted, and often reveals itself in very different ways. Let's take a look. Part 1. The function in the shadow. In Part 1, we looked at extroverted thinking in its conscious positions. Whether it appeared as the hero, parent, child, or inferior function, it remained something the person could recognize, develop, and intentionally engage with. The relationship might have been confident or hesitant depending on the position, but it was still part of the conscious personality. When extroverted thinking moves into the shadow, the function itself doesn't suddenly become different. It still values measurable results, external organization, efficiency, and objective decision-making. What changes is the person's relationship with it. It becomes less familiar, less trusted, and often feels like something that shows up on its own, rather than something they deliberately choose to use. Because of that, extroverted thinking often appears most strongly during moments of pressure. When someone feels challenged, criticized, overwhelmed, or forced to solve problems outside their comfort zone, this function may suddenly step forward. Sometimes it helps. Other times it feels awkward, excessive, or strangely unlike themselves. It's almost as if they borrow a tool they rarely use. They know what it's supposed to accomplish, but they don't have the same confidence or finesse that they have with their conscious functions. They may overcorrect, hesitate, or question whether they're using it appropriately. As we move deeper into the shadow, that uncertainty changes shape. First, it becomes something the person worries about, then something they criticize, then something they struggle to understand, and finally, something that may only emerge during life's most extreme moments. Let's start with extroverted thinking as the Nemesis function. Part 2. Nemesis Function. For INTP and ISTP, extroverted thinking occupies the Nemesis position. The Nemesis function often feels like a source of concern. It sits just outside conscious confidence, constantly asking, "What if I'm overlooking something?" With extroverted thinking, that concern often revolves around effectiveness, productivity, and whether things are being managed properly. These individuals may quietly worry that they're being seen as disorganized, inefficient, or incapable of handling practical responsibilities. Even if nobody else is questioning them, they may imagine that someone is evaluating how well they're performing. A simple comment like, "Are you almost finished?" might be interpreted as hidden criticism about their competence. This doesn't necessarily make them more organized. Instead, it often makes them more alert to situations where organization matters. They may double-check instructions, revisit decisions they've already made, or spend extra time making sure they haven't forgotten an important detail. Because nemesis functions are defensive, extroverted thinking can also become suspicious of external systems and authority. If someone insists that there's only one correct process, the person may wonder whether that process is actually the best one or whether people are simply following rules without thinking. They're not automatically rejecting structure, they're questioning whether the structure truly accomplishes its intended goal. Imagine someone assembling furniture with a friend. The friend immediately reaches for the instruction manual, while the person with nemesis extroverted thinking wants to understand how the pieces naturally fit together first. But at the same time, they're quietly wondering if ignoring the instructions will create a bigger problem later. They're caught between trusting their own reasoning and worrying that an established method might actually be safer. This tension can also appear in leadership situations. They may hesitate to take charge because they worry about making inefficient decisions or managing people poorly. Yet if nobody else steps up, they often become surprisingly capable of organizing the situation because necessity forces the function into action. Over time, developing trust in extroverted thinking means recognizing that efficiency doesn't require perfection. Systems can be adjusted, plans can be improved. Making practical decisions doesn't require absolute certainty before taking action. As the shadow moves deeper, however, extroverted thinking no longer feels merely worrying. It becomes something far more judgmental. Part 3. Critic Function for ENTP and ESTP. Extroverted thinking occupies the critic position. The critic function has an incredibly sharp eye for flaws, but that sharpness often points inward just as much as outward. With extroverted thinking, it becomes difficult to ignore inefficiency, wasted effort, or poorly designed systems. When looking inward, this can sound like an internal voice saying, "You should have handled that better, you wasted time, your process wasn't good enough." Even after completing a successful project, they may focus on everything that could have been optimized instead of appreciating what actually went well. That same critical lens easily extends to other people. They may become impatient with unnecessary meetings, confusing instructions, or coworkers who seem to complicate simple tasks. It's rarely just about disliking inconvenience. Instead, inefficient systems genuinely stand out to them in a way that's difficult to ignore. The challenge is that critic functions often expect a level of consistency that's difficult for real people to achieve. If a workplace has obvious problems, they may quickly identify 10 ways it could operate better. While many of those observations might be accurate, expressing them constantly can make them sound harsher than intended. Perfectionism often hides underneath this criticism. They may delay finishing a project because they keep finding better ways to organize it. Ironically, the pursuit of maximum efficiency can sometimes become inefficient itself. Imagine planning a family vacation. Rather than simply choosing a destination, they might spend hours comparing prices, travel times, hotel reviews, alternate routes, and backup plans. Every improvement feels worthwhile, but eventually the search for the optimal solution starts delaying the actual decision. Growth with critic extroverted thinking often comes from recognizing that optimization has diminishing returns. Sometimes a good solution today is more valuable than a perfect solution next week. Learning when to stop refining a process can be just as important as knowing how to improve one. As we descend further into the shadow, however, the issue isn't criticism anymore. It's losing track of how the function works altogether. Part 4. Trickster Function. For INFJ and ISFJ, extroverted thinking occupies the trickster position. The trickster function represents a blind spot. It isn't simply weak or underdeveloped. It's an area where misunderstandings naturally occur because the person often doesn't realize they're missing important information. With extroverted thinking, that blind spot often involves objective systems, measurable standards, and practical execution. Someone may have an excellent vision of what should happen while underestimating the logistical steps needed to make it happen. They may assume everyone shares the same understanding without clearly communicating expectations. Later, when things don't go as planned, they're genuinely surprised because what seemed obvious in their mind wasn't obvious to everyone else. Mixed signals are common here. They might ask for feedback but become confused when people focus on measurable outcomes instead of personal intentions. Or they may believe they've given very clear instructions when, in reality, they've only explained the goal rather than the practical process. Imagine organizing a community event. They have a clear picture of the atmosphere they want to create and how everyone should feel, but they accidentally overlook practical details like scheduling volunteers, confirming equipment, or assigning responsibilities. None of those tasks seemed especially difficult, yet somehow they became the biggest obstacles. This can also create misunderstandings during disagreements. Someone using strong extroverted thinking might focus entirely on facts, evidence, timelines, and measurable results. The person with trickster extroverted thinking may feel like the conversation has become strangely mechanical, while the other person feels they're simply discussing objective reality. Both sides leave thinking the other completely missed the point. Because it's a blind spot, people often don't notice the pattern until someone points it out repeatedly. Once they become aware of it, however, they can intentionally build habits that compensate for what doesn't come naturally. Checklists, written plans, and objective milestones become valuable not because the function suddenly becomes conscious, but because external tools help bridge the gap. The deepest part of the shadow, however, isn't about misunderstanding the function. It's about what happens when it erupts after being buried for a very long time. Part 5. Demon Function. For ENFJ and ESFJ, extroverted thinking occupies the demon position. The demon function often remains almost invisible during everyday life. A person may go years without consciously relying on it because their preferred ways of navigating the world usually work well enough. Most of the time, this part of the personality stays quiet. Under extreme psychological pressure, however, something changes. If someone feels completely cornered, repeatedly betrayed, or pushed beyond their emotional limits, extroverted thinking may suddenly emerge with surprising intensity. Instead of carefully balancing people's needs, they may become coldly focused on results. Feelings that normally receive tremendous attention are temporarily pushed aside as they concentrate on solving the problem as quickly and decisively as possible. To people who know them well, this shift can feel startling. Someone who normally prioritizes harmony may suddenly become blunt, uncompromising, and entirely focused on what works. Conversations become less about understanding and more about implementation. Efficiency replaces diplomacy. In its most destructive form, this can become excessively controlling. They may begin treating relationships like problems to solve rather than connections to nurture. Frustration can lead them to issue commands instead of invitations, dismiss emotional concerns as distractions, or believe that achieving the objective justifies an unusually harsh approach. Fortunately, demon functions are not permanent states. They usually appear during exceptional circumstances rather than ordinary life. As the immediate crisis passes, the person's more familiar way of engaging with the world gradually returns. Perhaps more importantly, self-awareness changes the relationship with the demon function. Someone who recognizes this pattern can notice the early warning signs before reaching that breaking point. Instead of allowing extroverted thinking to erupt uncontrollably, they can consciously borrow some of its strengths in healthier ways, setting clearer boundaries, making decisive plans, creating practical systems, or addressing problems directly before they become overwhelming. That doesn't transform the demon into a conscious strength overnight, but it does reduce the likelihood that it only appears during crisis. And on rare occasions, the very function that once surfaced as a last resort can become an unexpected source of resilience, providing the objectivity and decisiveness needed to navigate life's most difficult moments without losing sight of the people those decisions ultimately affect. By now, hopefully you've seen that this cognitive function never actually changed. Even in the Nemesis, Critic, Trickster, and Demon functions, it remained the same underlying cognitive process. What changed was the person's relationship with it. Rather than being trusted and consciously relied upon, it became less conscious, less trusted, and often revealed itself during moments of stress, insecurity, or psychological pressure. Understanding the shadow isn't about labeling parts of yourself as good or bad. It's about recognizing that every cognitive function has both conscious and unconscious expressions, and that becoming aware of them is an important step toward understanding both yourself and others.